Let's take a look at the ratios that managers can use to assess the liquidity of the company. Now, these ratios are really just looking at if the company is going to be able to meet its current obligations in a timely manner. That is, can they pay their current liabilities as they become due? These ratios are generally going to focus on the current assets and current liabilities of the company. So as you look at Aggie Inc.'s financial information, you will be focusing on the current assets and current liabilities section of the balance sheet. You'll want to have that out to reference as we move along. The first relationship that we'll look at is called working capital. This is just a general measure of liquidity, and the formula is current assets minus current liabilities. So if we look at the balance sheet for Aggie Inc., you can see that the current assets would be cash, accounts receivable, inventory, and prepaid expense. These assets will either be used up or converted to cash within the year. So they're called the most liquid or the current assets. Those add up to be $45,000. Now let's turn our focus to the current liabilities section of the balance sheet for Aggie. The accounts payable, wages payable, and income tax payable are all going to be paid within the year. Now, bonds payable, generally speaking, are long-term. If there's any current portion of that bond payable, it'll be reclassified on the balance sheet as current portion of long-term debt. So again, generally speaking, we can say bonds payable are long-term liabilities. And the remainder of the accounts there are equity accounts. So our current liabilities add up to $21,000. So working capital can be computed as $45,000, that's the current assets, minus the current liabilities of $21,000, or $24,000. So what does this mean? All this tells us is that the current assets exceed current liabilities by $24,000. Now, this does indicate that there are enough current assets to pay those current liabilities. The problem is the relative nature of this particular calculation. $24,000 of working capital may be okay for Aggie, who has $45,000 of current assets and $21,000 of current liabilities. But for a company that has $450,000 and $210,000, in other words, a larger company, $24,000 of working capital might not be sufficient. So for that reason, we have another widely used measure called the current ratio. And this will look at the relationship between current assets and current liabilities. The formula is current assets divided by current liabilities. So we can take the numbers we just computed, that is current assets of $45,000 divided by current liabilities of $21,000, and we get 2.14, or sometimes this is written as 2.14 to 1. Now what this tells management is that the current assets are more than twice the current liabilities. And in some industries, the rule of thumb is that you want this to at least be 2.0 or higher. Now, obviously, if this gets too high, you're really not using your assets wisely. So there is a range that would be appropriate. We do have one more measure of liquidity. It's called the quick or acid test ratio. And this, again, looks at can we pay our current liabilities with our current assets, but what it does is it excludes the less liquid current assets. So the formula, if you look in the numerator, those are all current assets: cash, marketable securities, and current receivables. And we divide by current liabilities. But if you think about the assets that this is excluding, when we look at our balance sheet, we'll be able to see that. This is going to include the cash, the marketable securities, which there are none, so that is 0, and then the accounts receivable of $14,000. But if you look at the balance sheet, you can see that it is excluding inventory and prepaid expense. The idea is that inventory is not nearly as liquid as accounts receivable because the inventory's not even been sold yet. So there's no legal claim to actually receiving that when you sell it because you have not even sold it. And of course, prepaid expense, that's like prepaid rent, and that typically will never be converted to cash, so it is excluded. Turning our focus to the current liabilities, you can see that accounts payable, wages payable, and taxes payable are the current liabilities. They add up to $21,000. So the denominator is the same as the current ratio. All right, so when we plug into our formula, it will look like this. Cash of $6,000 plus no marketable securities plus current receivables of $14,000. We'll divide by 21,000 of current liabilities, and we get 0.95 or 0.95 to 1. Now what this tells the manager is that Aggie can almost pay all of its current liabilities without even having to sell any inventory. All right, so when managers are looking at assessing liquidity, again, they are trying to figure out, can we pay our current liabilities as they become due? And the easiest way to do that is to be able to pay them out of your current assets.